email. Don't quite send, did you send it to Nathan or do you send it to individual
I
legislators?
send it to a couple of you that have had emails right off, and also Nathan.
Okay. I don't see it. My email is sirotkin.senate@gmail. If you could send that to me. It hasn't come in yet.
Yeah,
I got it. Thank you.
I got it.
Josh, this is the one you sent a while ago with the summary of the amounts that you needed.
Yes, this was the one that
You
Senator
sent it,
Sorokin asked for, like a breakdown of, what's the
Right.
total proposal and what's the minimum to start this up. February 5th is the date.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me bring the committee up to speed. Many of you already are. There's been a fair amount of conversation between members of our committee and the Appropriations Committee and the administration. And we've had Josh and others in, and Richard Williams briefly a couple of times, trying to get a handle on the $200 million housing and utility grant that the feds gave us as of December, by act of Congress, signed December 27th. Guidelines have been forthcoming. Guardrails and restrictions on that money have been assessed, and the process by which that money will go out has been the subject of much discussion. How much input does the legislature get to say over the amount that hits the street immediately? How much can be held in reserve? What program parameters we would like to see within the confines of the federal law. You recall Richard Williams originally came in and said to get started with this on the rental assistance piece, he would need $50 million. A lot of that was driven, I think, in part because he needed administrative money to get up and running, and he can only, whatever we allow to go forward, he can only use 10% for administrative dollars. So he was effectively saying, I need $5 million right now to start contracting with other third-party vendors to get this up and running. I'll tell you my own feeling and then I'll open it up for discussion. I think the direction, let me put the cart before the horse. I think what Joint Fiscal is going to recommend is approximately half of the $110 million that the department and agency wants to put towards housing of the $200 million. With the, so that would be $50 or $55 million, which is in Josh's memo as a minimum starting point to get us up and running and get money out the door and give the legislature a few more weeks to weigh in on terms of program parameters. For me, this comes down to I'm obviously a very strong housing advocate. I realize there's a very strong need here. I realize there's a great deal of money, which cuts both ways. It gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of how we can spend that money. It also gives us the freedom to let go of money right now to get the money out the door very quickly. The one area that has been of concern, I think, is how much even greater flexibility could we get? Could we put money into a wider range of populations? Can we put it into bricks and mortars, into the housing stock that we desperately need? Are there other ways to spend this money? And as recently as a few days ago, I think the pro tem and the speaker had asked the congressional delegation to try and get that greater flexibility, either in the guidelines around this $200 million, or could the federal government, when they pass the Biden bill, can they go back and change the Trump restrictions? Tons of moving parts here. It's getting really tiresome in terms of trying to reach agreement. The last words pretty clearly from Jane Kitchell yesterday in a conversation we had with the Joint Fiscal Committee is, let's just do the $50 million. We know we can get started up, and we'll get another bill out in the next few weeks, which may not do anything other than give the rest of the money under the paradigm that the housing agency wants to do, but it would at least give legislators a little bit more time to put their imprimatur on some of the structure of this program. So that's where we are. I'm looking for feedback from the committee. I promised the Joint Fiscal Committee I would get back to them with our committee's thoughts, trying to balance the legislature having some say in this. We theoretically have control over the purse and designing programs. As we saw last year, we would take months to design a program like this, but it's being pressured by money out the door. So this is, I think, a good sweet spot at this point that will allow money to go out the door and at the same time preserve some legislative oversight over this massive amount of money that we're being given. And we're probably going to be getting more from the Biden COVID Relief Fund. So I'll shut up at that point and take a look to see if anybody has their hands up. Senator Brock.
How much money is needed? I see how much money we've got, but I don't see anything that tells me how much money we need.
Well, there are very different ways to approach that question. The agency will tell you that if every person in their 76,000 rental units, of which 50,000 are within the means testing, if everybody applied for every dollar, the $200 million doesn't get us there. The flip side of this, and I'm sure you will ask this question, Senator Brock, we had $23 million in the last program, and we couldn't spend it all in the 6 months or the year we had. And that all depends on penetration rate. We're much more attuned now that we got to get the word out and find mechanisms to get more people to apply. So it will depend on the number of people who apply, but in the next 2 to 3 weeks, when Senator Kitchell is saying she's going to get another bill out and can give the legislature a little bit more time to look at this, I'm convinced that they're not going to spend the full $50 million. So there'll be
And of course, this issue of having other people apply, I still don't have any basis for saying, well, what's the real need? You may have additional people apply, but is there need? When I compare that, for example, of how many people are in the kind of desperate situation that requires the state to intervene to help them pay their rent, as opposed to people who may say, this is a great program for free money. Well, now, I know that either situation applies, but I don't have any basis for judging. And I'm wondering if the administration has done any projections at all to where this money will go and to what kinds of people and for what purpose.
I'll let Josh answer that, but you and I have different perspectives on this. I agree there may be a lot of people who get money who are not necessarily in desperate need. But in the terms of income inequality, these people can use help and it will pump money into the economy. The same can be said true of the PPP program or economic recovery grants. People have gotten that money that didn't show desperate need. But it also helps in a COVID environment, and it helps prime the economy. And we're in a fortunate situation through Senator Leahy's activity to have a wealth of information that has resulted in us having these surpluses. That's a good thing. It's not the mindset that we've been used to functioning in, where we just had to function on the most vulnerable, the people who are less vulnerable, who can still benefit and can help our economy. So I'll let
May
Josh.
may I
Yes.
just tag in here, which is that, remember, Randy, this money comes with very strict eligibility what you call guardrails. It is absolutely targeted at the people most in need. And I think Josh and Sean can address that, but I think we're way behind the 8 ball here. I mean, we already have January rent for people who are in desperate need. So I'm eager to see as much as we can feel comfortable getting out the door as quickly as possible, because we have people in major need right now. So Josh, I'm sorry to.
And the notion of dealing with people who are in major need, but at the same time, we have a fiduciary responsibility. We're giving away essentially $200 million, and I don't think it's unreasonable to ask for what and why.
So just to back up, we haven't paid rent since November. You know, the 25 million wasn't enough. There's still 1,500 applications that haven't been paid. And that was only for rent going backwards, not rent going forward.
Do you have estimates in terms of what the real need is? That's really what I'm asking for, Josh.
This money goes by and large to the landlords that are not getting paid.
Mhm.
There are thousands of landlords that are not getting paid for months, that are going bankrupt, trying to pay their mortgages, their heating. There's being liens placed on their property. I can't speak to every tenant that maybe has means coming in that is choosing not to pay the rent. That is a bigger discussion. But the fact is, there is need for this money to pay the bills that are going unpaid. And there's eligibility requirements about restricting this to households below 80% of area median income. So that's all. Those are only folks that are going to get this money. We will have to see how successful we are, how much the need really exists, and how many people apply by distributing it within the rules that exist. I understand your question, Senator Brock, and this is a large amount of money, and yeah, we don't just want to throw it away. But there is need out there, and we need to get this money into the hands of the folks that need it and begin that process, because we're way behind. I just talked to the state of Connecticut. They've already moved tens of millions of dollars. This was a federal program that laid out the rules on January 27th that has a website, and we received the money mid-January, and we have people's bills that we could have been paying that need help.
So
Other committee members?
well, to that end, is this, if we can get a bill out ASAP for 55, with another one to follow once we are clearer on the uptake and who've been identified and all the issues that have been addressed, is 55 enough to get us started, and how quickly do you need that?
The 50,
Tomorrow.
the 55 would be released tomorrow by joint.
Oh, okay. Oh, I'm sorry. So it doesn't need to be in a bill that goes the normal route?
No, and Jane is promising that she thinks she can get another bill out either right around before we leave or right around then. And it may or may not have additional requirements or guardrails, or we may, even one of the things that sort of changed my harder line on this is we heard from the administration that our idea of getting more flexibility for different uses of this $200 million was shut down by our congressional delegation vis-a-vis the December 27th $200 million. the thought was maybe in the Biden plan, they could pass a law and say, we're going to loosen some of those restrictions from the December 27th law. I mean, that letter from the legislature to our congressional delegate just went out a few days ago. And the response I saw from them was that they didn't think so, but there's always a possibility. So if that possibility opened up, we might have other choices. And if we can have our cake and eat it too by getting enough money out the door to start paying all these bills while we continue to look at this for a few more weeks, I think that's the most common sense solution.
I would support that 100%.
The only thing I just wanted to bring up here is, the memo lays out, we're just talking about the rental assistance piece, 55 million. This is a grant acceptance process that we've gone through here. This is a federal grant award that the Joint Fiscal Committee is voting to accept, and we've laid out a plan for the expenditure of that. And it has more than just the rental. It's got the utility assistance. It's got other housing support services, AHS homeless support. So, the flexibility piece, the majority of this funds needs to go for the rental assistance and utility assistance, and that's statute. And what our congressional delegation is saying is they're not reopening statute. They will focus on the flexibility of some of these other housing support services and some of the admin costs, but that the majority of these funds have to go for rental assistance, arrearage and forward up to 15 months in some cases, and utility arrearage and forward up to 15 months in some cases for households below 80% area median income. That's what 90% of this money needs to be spent on. So
a couple of things. One, I hope the Finance Committee and the Human Services Committee are having the same conversations that we're having here on those other pieces. We're focused mostly on the housing pieces and the discretionary funds and the other housing money. So we're in agreement that at least to the 55 plus the other add-ons in your memo, in the second half of your memo, at least that's where I'm going. When I heard from and I agree with you that the law from December is pretty tight, and I also agree that it sounds like it's unlikely to change, but I haven't heard definitively that the new law that the Biden bill has, even though they say it's unlikely to change, there could be some tweaks. You never know what happens with legislation, and I'd hate to lock us in to a certain thing unless there was a really compelling need to get all the money out the door right now. I'm just trying to have our cake and eat it too. Leave open that small percentage that we may have other opportunities that you and I may agree with. We'd rather spend it in a different direction, but also get it done in enough time so that you can get all the money out the door when it's needed, which I think if we gave you 55 plus the other stuff would give you enough wiggle room over the next few weeks to hit the ground running 100%. And then we'll just look at it again. See where we are. We had this experience, Josh, that you're well aware of, that the pro tem's well aware of last year, where we're constantly trying to play catch up to things that change, to more money coming in, and sometimes making premature, non-targeted decisions. So just trying to approach this in a common sense fashion that doesn't give away all the legislative authority. Anybody else? Senator Rahm.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Can someone remind me, and it might be in the memo, which I was trying to review quickly, how long is the stay of eviction that the legislature put in place? Does that go for the duration of the emergency order?
So the way that the eviction moratorium in Vermont has been established, it extends 30 days past the expiration of the governor's executive order, which as we speak, will expire in 5 days, but is likely to be extended. I don't have inside information on that, but that has been the path so far. However, there's also a federal eviction moratorium that is a little less stringent, for lack of a better term, than the one that Vermont has. And my understanding is that actually extends through, Wendy might be able to correct me, through the end of this calendar year. Is that accurate, or is?
I think it's through March 31st, and Biden wants to extend it into September.
Okay, thank you. And so if I may, to Senator Brock's question about quantification, we've been really closely involved with, obviously, with the Vermont State Housing Authority on the design of this program. It's as Commissioner Hanford mentioned, the 25 million was not enough. I have a growing list of Post-it notes from landlords and tenants who are calling me daily to ask about this assistance. The amount of, based on some of the calculations that we've run with Vermont State Housing Authority and trying to quantify, we expect that they could very easily spend $100 million in assistance. I think it's important to also point out that of those folks, half of the renters in Vermont are cost burdened. They're spending more than 30% of their income on rent. At risk of proselytizing a little bit, I think that the downside of spending federal dollars that otherwise would go back to the U.S. Treasury to assist some of those households, even if they're not in extreme need due to COVID-19 pandemic response, would still go a long way to helping some folks build up some of the savings that we often recognize that they don't have. But I think by and large, we need to not forget and I know that you don't forget the needs of these landlords who may not be getting paid, even if it's a situation where they might be able to, knowing that they have no other recourse than to apply for this. To your question earlier, very earlier this morning, I conferred with our general counsel about the guardrails around this particular program, and at risk of confusing things, the rental housing stabilization program that we ran required a dual application from the landlord and the tenant, and that was in order to get the full rental payment. And that was a sort of an anti-fraud device. We wanted to make sure that we had some sort of verification from both parties about the amount of rent that was owed. There was an option in that program for a landlord to apply without tenant cooperation and receive half of what they were purportedly owed. The new program that's coming in with the federal regulations around it allows for a landlord to apply on behalf of the tenant, so they can fill out the entire application, but they do need to get a tenant's signature. And we are awaiting, again, as with so many other things, awaiting Treasury guidance if there's any wiggle room for if a tenant refuses to apply. So just to answer the question that was brought up earlier this morning. I also think, as in terms of need, we're talking a lot about the rental assistance portion of this bill, and rightfully so. As has been noted, it's also a utility arrearage option. We've asked for 16 million in the memo to go to Department of Public Service. They have already identified at least $15 million of arrearages that they could pay out tomorrow if they were allowed to do so. They, not to put words in their mouth, but during our meeting seemed a little bit reticent about taking on a pretty extensive program. But in the conversations that our department, Vermont State Housing Authority, and others have had with the various vendors who would be building up the efficient online application system that would actually allow us to move this amount of money in the time allotted, we would actually be able to include utility assistance in that application, which would dramatically expand the public service department's ability to cover rental arrearages. So there is significant, there has been a lot of calculation on need. And Senator Sirotkin, to your point, even in this memo, were the Joint Fiscal Committee to release the entire amount, not saying that that is what they're looking towards, but there is actually 26, I believe it's $26 million that is left in the hands of the Agency of Administration to administer, should in the long shot chance that bricks and mortar or other opportunities come along, despite the fact that our congressional delegation is pretty confident that that won't be the case. But there is some quite a bit of, I would say, quite a bit of buffer to allow for some adaptation should we be able to do that in the future.
Thank you. I do want to say, I hope we don't go down the road. This was actually discussed yesterday in the Joint Fiscal Committee, that there was a lot of money set aside for utility arrearages, and the projection of the need was far outpaced the take-up rate by people wanting to get their utility bills arrearages relieved. And the Public Service Department, or the PUC, wound up lifting the moratorium on shutoffs, and that was the only way they could get people to apply for the help. And somebody was sort of implying that maybe we should lift the moratorium on evictions, and then people would start applying for the rental assistance. That's not going to happen on my watch, but I hope there's no further discussion of that. That's playing with fire. Anyhow, does anybody have anything else? Otherwise, I think that for those of you who were there yesterday, I'm going to pretty much second Jane Kitchell's position on how we should go forward and keep our eye on the ball, the prize, to continue to work with our partners in the executive branch to continue to move this money out fast with input from us, and come up with perhaps the same plan that they're putting forward, for perhaps some tweaks, but we'll do it in a timely fashion. We have it scheduled. We have it scheduled every week going forward to be talking about this.
So, Mr. Chair, may I just clarify something?
Yes.
If we, so Joint Fiscal has basically approved the notion that 55 could be released tomorrow to start getting us caught up, because we're so behind the eight ball, I think, right now. Could conceivably the additional money be released by JFC after we look at it and propose it and recommend it equally fast, or do you envision everything else having to go through a bill?
That's subject to further discussion. I think that, first of all, I want to reiterate Josh's point. The 55 million is just for housing. There would be more money released for JFC for some of these other things, but sort of like everything would sort of be proportionally half of what they had originally asked for. So there'd be money for utility assistance, there would be money for other housing needs, there would be money held in reserve. So that's what Jane was suggesting yesterday.
But it
And
isn't
yes,
that,
yes,
yeah.
and yes, I see no reason why, if Jane wants to involve the legislature in like her mini CRF and the committees of jurisdiction in her decision of how to spend the rest of the money through another mini budget bill. But if things got stalled or whatever, the administration could come back in and say, can we get a modification of this original grant and release the money through the Joint Fiscal Committee process, I believe, very quickly. So there are those two avenues at that point.
I guess I certainly am happier with getting 55 million out. Sorry.
Very exciting.
Take your time. Be healthy.
Glass of water.
Yeah.
You okay?
Certainly happier with 55 than 5 or 10, but given what we just heard about the utilities, I don't want us to be patchworking it again either. So if we know that there is an immediate need on the utility arrearages, why don't we include that in this and get the first amount out and actively engaged in solving our challenges?
I will deliver a message to finance this afternoon, but I think we have been hearing information on the utility arrearage program in finance in a fair amount of depth, and we haven't really heard it here. So I think it's appropriate to leave it to the finance committee to make a recommendation on that number. Okay.
Then I would go as quickly as possible with the 55 that's recommended.
Okay. Take care of yourself. Go take a
I'm
break.
here.
Take a break. So, okay, can we thank you, Sean and Josh, very informative as usual. So let's hear from Brittany Wilson. I think we have about 15 minutes, 10 minutes. I'm sorry, I'm getting screwed up. What's that? Yeah, no, we do have 10 minutes. 11:30 is our time to end today. So Brittany, how are you? Thank you, guys. We gave you the delay requested until today to bring us up to speed. None of us probably have heard in detail what the governor and commissioner have expressed yesterday, but we want to stay continually involved on a periodic basis with you, try and keep your time before us at a minimum, but why don't you give us the synopsis of what's going on?
Yeah, well, thanks for bearing with me and moving the testimony to today. I appreciate that. Guess a couple of updates. I'm not sure if the commissioner mentioned yesterday, we were able to, he was able to set up a call center script. So when you call the main line, there's a script now providing some information.
Great.
So that's good. And then Senator Ron had mentioned, I think, some translation services. I have a meeting today with AALV and a member from the department who is she's our racial equity liaison, as we have one in each agency and department. And so I'm going to work on setting up translation services for this incident. And then she'll be included as the point person going forward for the department. So we'll kind of figure this out together and make sure that the department has a contact in the path forward there. I will just say generally things are moving forward. Things never seem to be quite as simple and clean as we would all like them. Systems and processes are old and antiquated, and a lot of manual data and input and verification, and it makes for a really challenging process kind of altogether. That's not an excuse, but it's some reality that I think we could avoid some errors in the future with some modernization. So I'll make a strong, hard pitch for some the modernization money that's included in the governor's budget. It would help us significantly in these scenarios and probably actually avoid some of them.
Could you, if you don't already have this, can you get us a short memo on the modernization money specifically as it relates to DOL? I guess I was sort of aware, but I was going to ask you, I think we've talked in this committee that we really are interested in seeing a plan of how we're going to get to the future starting as soon as possible.
Yeah, I'll let the ADS team work on that. I know they're testifying, I believe today, in House Energy and Technology on all of those modernization projects and IT projects. So they'll have a lot of that already. And so I can ask that they send those details along to you all, specifically to the UI modernization.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Senator,
we're intimately familiar with the need.
Definitely. So the rollout of the ID theft protection services, I'm not sure if you all saw the press release we sent out this morning,
Yeah,
which lays out some details of that. You might notice that we mentioned services would be for a minimum of 12 months. There's some reasons not to disclose the timing and how long we'd be covering claimants. So it's a minimum of 12 months, but it's a pretty generous package, which we should be doing, quite honestly. Not to take away from what has been done to them or has caused them from this incident, but it's a pretty robust package of ID monitoring, cyber monitoring, insurance protection if any damages are incurred. And so we're working to set this up as quickly as possible. But again, providing names and lists have kind of become the bane of my existence over here with various programs and lists. And we want to just, everything we're doing is going through at least another 3 steps of verification. But one of the things that I wanted to mention to this committee, and I don't have anything specific for you right now, but part of the verification process, the Department of Taxes was very generous in taking our data and running it against their data. But there's a Vermont statute that prohibits them from validating or correcting any of that data and sending it back to us. And it's pretty serious that if any employee were to, not follow this law, the penalties are significant. There's some general exemptions. It's not entirely clean and clear to a few lawyers that I've asked to look at it. And so I think we should consider those statutes for tax, and maybe with other state agencies. They're kind of piecemeal, it seems to be, across the state. And this isn't necessarily something for your committee, but I'm just raising it because it's been a bit of a barrier, and it's probably slowed us down a couple of days in terms of reissuing new 1099s.
well, I remember we worked on a bill. I think it was in this committee, it may have been in finance, where we allowed for some data sharing between tax and the Department of Labor.
Yep,
I don't know if workers' comp or UI, but
it was PUA.
okay.
for PUA, right?
So,
It was
I mean-
income verification, and that exemption in statute's very specific to PUA. Because I looked at that, but it wasn't broad enough for us to use it in this instance. We need it specifically for the UI population.
right,
regular
so,
UI.
so I would offer your follow-up to us. I mean, if we can do a narrow temporary fix that gets at this problem without, having unintended consequences in other areas, we'd be open to that. I mean, but obviously it would be narrow, it would be short-lived, and saying we've got a particular crisis here that nobody ever expected, and this could help everybody, and we can't see who would oppose it. So, we're capable of moving fast at times if you need that.
Okay,
Or an emergency rule, there may be a way of doing an emergency rule. I don't
No,
know.
there,
Yeah,
there
that-
isn't. This is Damien. They
Okay,
don't have statutory authority for that.
okay,
So they need the statutory fix that Brittany's talking about.
Okay.
And that's something that I could draft pretty quickly for the committee if you decide to move forward with that. We've done those in the past.
I
Yeah,
don't
well,
think
we,
it hurts. If you all don't mind, we're gonna pursue a couple of other avenues at the same time. And in my mind, whatever seems to be the simplest, most efficient way to move forward, and happens the quickest, we might pursue that. But I don't think it hurts to have that emergency exemption, even if we don't use it right now.
well, what
there-
else would you do to get around it?
Well, so there's a couple of things. I'm looking at the DMV statute. There's actually more flexibility in DMV statute and what even the federal government allows under DIPA.
What's
Yeah.
DIPA?
The Driver Protection Privacy Act.
Oh, yeah, the one that ICE honored so fully.
Right. Yes, you probably have all heard of this, and DMV has done a great job at revamping their policies and procedures and
Yeah.
administrative rules to really clamp down on information, which is good. But and we've done it in other areas, which is good. But in this circumstance where we're trying to prevent more harm or confusion or undue delays for claimants, it's unfortunate. I will say this: we can still mail out 1099s. The data we're trying to confirm is the Social Security number. We can truncate those numbers. We should have been all along probably, but we can, based on the IRS guidance. We could send them out. We can send a letter with these new 1099s and say, we believe your information may not be correct or match your social, and you should update it. You can still file your taxes. If the only information on that 1099 that's wrong is the social, they can still file. So if we have everything else right, they can file. The tax department does this every year because people incorrectly put in their socials or an error occurs somewhere. Tax department reaches out, they correct it, they go through and process tax returns. It slows things down, and we're already behind schedule. So I really feel like we should do whatever we can to try to verify those socials ahead of time. So it's not necessarily fatal, but I feel like claimants expect us to be able to get this information correct, or at least try to get it correct from a sister agency or department that probably has it correct. And there's just some really funky laws, and for good reason. But in this scenario, it's unfortunate that we can't get it corrected as easily as we'd like.
why don't we do this, because we don't have a lot of time. Work with Damien on legislation we can have in our back pocket to get at this if you choose this is the best alternative. But please think about any groups out there that might have concern with doing this and connect with them. Maybe the ACLU or some other people in terms of privacy concerns. There may have been, I'm sure there were some policy reasons that went into these laws for the long term, but the immediate circumstances may outweigh the long term. So you can get us a memo, and we can deal with it again on Friday, maybe even sooner, but we're into working with you. I even offered that before. I said, if there are laws that we can change,
Right.
getting in the way, maybe we could help. So,
Right.
Yeah, I'll give ACLU a call.
But also, Brittany, I mean, we can't confuse them again. To send out something that's only half right, we need to get it perfect next time round. We don't have a lot of, to send them out something that is again not not wholly what they need, it's not helpful for the user. I mean,
It
for
doesn't feel right to me either.
no,
right.
so I'd rather do
Especially
a
if we can
fix.
try.
Yeah, I'd rather do a fix, an emergency fix like we did with PUA, get it right and send it out to them instead of adding more confusion on the back for our UI recipients.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, I don't think we're ever going to have all these records 100% accurate. That people move. Another agency might have a number wrong, but I think we owe it to them to try to get the best information we possibly can. But I don't want to overpromise that it's all going to be perfect.
Nothing is perfect, but we can get it the best we can get it.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what is demanded of us, required of us now.
I think, there's some faith and trust lost in all of this, right? And
yeah.
And part of that is like, we're going to do our due diligence to try to get you back the best info we have. But said it wrong.
So I just wanted to raise three things. One that I've heard related to right now, and two sort of looking ahead. One is that it felt unsettling to some people I talked to when they got a live person to hear that poor person on the other side who's probably doing their best say things like, I assume so, and not have yes or no, or I don't know the answer to that. So I was just trying to capture from those folks, what were they talking about assuming, and can we get clear answers on that? So I just imagine now that there is a live person on the other end, will get FAQs regularly that feel like they're updated based on the feedback of the people who feel like they can't answer certain questions. So I just wanted to flag that. I was going to put in the chat a WCAX piece that was brought to my attention from last week. It has the auditor in it, and it's sort of asking, are we keeping Vermonters' data safe? And then it has testimony from a woman who spoke with us, some of us last night, who is a Champlain College professor who deals with data privacy. So I didn't know if you were in communication with her, because the first thing she says is, I hope they're deploying a standard to a data breach plan. And I thought, well, let's have that going forward, and maybe it involves some statutory changes, but while we have something like this, we should make sure we're really immediately capturing lessons to standardize it. And then one thing I want to say in our modernization effort is that I just hope, I hope beyond hope, it includes making 1099s available digitally at the same time they're available by mail, or I don't even know when they're going to be available digitally. It will be sometime after they're available by mail to look back. But, people really are usually looking right away online because mail is much more complicated. So,
right. That comes with a whole host of other security protections too, but the capabilities are there for PUA, I believe. It's the regular UI population with the 40-year-old mainframe that's the modernization piece that could help us get there. I just wanted to mention, because I think you asked the commissioner yesterday about some functionality where claimants who wish to enroll in ID protection services could go to the website and get more information and enroll and sign up. That capability is going to be provided by the vendor. And so it won't be on our website, but that's where we're going to, that's information we're sending to the claimants. I'm like, here's how you can enroll, here's how you can set up your account. They have all of we're working with them on frequently asked questions, scripting, and they have their own call center with FAQs. They have like a baseline of FAQs they use, obviously, because there's a lot of similar questions.
The question yesterday was, or the concern yesterday was mostly to let people know that this ID protection was going to be taken care of for them at state expense. And I think that that process has started with the press conference and the press release. I don't know whether it's also all over the web page, and you make it very easy to click on to the next place they can go. You make it clear to them when this is going to be functional. That's what people want to know. They want to know,
right.
Oh, it's being worked on. I can expect to sign up on a certain such a day, and this is the click I need to do to do that. And the commissioner said, he may be ready by the 22nd. And we said, that's not acceptable. I mean, at least get some preliminary word out to people to know. And it sounds to me like you've made the decision, you're going to do it. So why can't people know that that's going to happen?
Yep. I think we've been saying by next week, if not earlier. Again, the only piece that I'm really waiting on to move forward with this ID theft protection is the lists. It's the names and the addresses in the data that needs to be verified. That continues to be our biggest hurdle in all of these pieces.
Let me be clear. I'm not concerned that this thing won't go live until next week. I'm concerned that people aren't getting the message that it's going live next week. That they're just in limbo right now. Just give them some encouraging word that, we're on track and we made the decision, we're going to pay for it. We're processing it now. You will be getting word next week that how to do it. I also wonder, and I've actually gotten a couple of emails on this from people, and I understand. In one of your emails, you said, okay, if you want to protect your credit history, go to Experian or
they list 3.
They list 3. Even asking people to do that can be difficult for them. In the Equifax thing, people went on to Equifax and they got sent into the ether somewhere, got all confused what they needed to do. Is there anything that the department can do to make even that simpler? Let me just, I know it's pie in the sky, but what I'm thinking of is if you want your credit file protected with this fact, click here and we will take care of that for you.
Yeah, that would be.
Perhaps. I think that could be an option. My only concern right now is capacity to get these things done. And I think the identity theft protection package and service is really important. And I want to make sure we get that up and running. And then these other companies, the credit bureaus we listed, that's just a freeze on your credit, right? So it's not as robust as these other services. I think we can certainly add that into a consideration, and it would have to be like an opt-in step where they might have to click twice just to confirm you're giving the department your permission and authority to share your PII. I mean, we get into a whole other issue of us having to share information with a company.
I understand.
So I'll just let us noodle on that. I hear what you're saying.
Okay, good enough.
Just to make it as simple as possible.
Speaking of that, I want to mention we're going to put together some information for these individuals that will make it as simple as possible to get a tax filing extension if they need it. At least provide the information, let them know it's available to them. I don't believe that it's a overly cumbersome or hard extension to get. I think it's fairly simple. And so just letting them know that that is an option, because I know that's a concern of a lot of folks that they're going to get their 1099s late. And so again, just kind of try to proactively let them know this is an option if you need it. Here's the information that you need, and just try to make it as easy as possible for them to get one if they'd like.
Is that on the federal or the state level or both?
Well, so we'd want to couple it with the federal too and provide those details.
I would think on the state level, you should be able to figure out a way where there's some identifying thing on the 1099 that triggers an extended date without the recipient having to do anything. But
we thought about that, but it does tie to the federal one, as you pointed out. So it only gets us halfway.
I know the federal one would be more problematic, but
yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yep.
Just before this gets too far away, speaking of taxes, Brittany, I wanted to just flag for you when you're talking to your counterparts at DOL that the authorization for tax to provide information on PUA expired. So that wouldn't, we could do that all as part of a package of the language.
Ah, good point.
So that,
Thanks a lot,
um,
Damien.
Thank you.
yeah, your conversation brought it up in my mind, and I thought to just double check that, and it expired in mid-January.
Oh, jeez.
So that needs to be extended, and then we could do any other authorization quickly. When we did that, we made it retroactively effective because tax had already been providing the information to get things moving. And I assume they've probably continued to do that, and we could do the same thing.
You might want to make that retroactive to the date that it expired.
That's exactly what I was thinking, is we could make it retroactively effective. And then if it helps speed things along and the committee supported it, we could also make an authorization for tax to provide the assistance now retroactively effective to help move the identity confirmation forward for this process. So I just wanted to highlight that for the committee, and when you're talking to your counterparts at Labor about the best way to move forward on this.
Would the committee feel comfortable in moving that forward? I still would like to pursue these other options, but I always have the fear now where we feel like we have a good path forward. There always seems to be some wrinkle in a plan, and sometimes we might need to verify with DMV and verify with tax. I mean, that might not be the worst case scenario.
It's a little fuzzy in my mind. I'd like to hear a little bit more details by Friday, if we can put it off for 2 days.
Well-
but I'm not ready to pass a bill out today. So
No, but Damien's got to draft it still. But I think time is of the essence. And just to go back, I mean, I think we want as much accurate information going out in this round as possible to everybody. So in my mind, we need to extend the PUA communication piece between tax and VDOL and VDOL, and definitely enable the identity confirmation for the UI piece. So I would hope we could do this with speed.
One option, if the committee wants it to consider on Friday, is if the committee authorizes me, I can draft DOL's proposed language, and then it's up to the committee to decide whether to move forward. And I can draft 2 options, one with just the PUA language and one with PUA and the identity language. And then if the committee decides to move either of those, they can do that on Friday.
that's fine. I would like Brittany and her team to write, with your help, an accompanying memo explaining all this, why we need it, how it's going to help, what the pitfalls are, who might object, all of that. I mean, essentially, it will help for the testimony in doing this to have that in writing in advance. So
Would it be okay for Damien and I to connect briefly
absolutely.
on this afterwards? I have a couple of thoughts that we can make it narrow and hopefully clear and short term. And okay.
Great.
Thank you very much. Anything else, Brittany? We're
over. Yeah.
You're way over. Sorry.
Yeah, 15 minutes overdue. We're good to go, committee, at this point?
Yeah.
See
Good
you-
work, Brittany. Keep up the good work.
Thank
see
you.
See you
Thank
all
you
at
for your help.
once.
Yeah.
Bye.